Good morning. In this video, I will show you the steps I took to make this side access door in my shipping container, including the hinges I made, the steel I chose, and the total cost of this door. But first, let's take a good look at it so you can see what I'm talking about. Here is a before and after. So the door itself is made from the piece I cut out of the container. Around the door and door frame, I used 25 by 50 RHS and 40mm flat bar. For the hinges, I used 15mm ID pipe inside of 20mm ID pipe. Before I cut a huge hole into the side of the shipping container, I wanted to get the hinge side figured out. I was working on this idea in my head for a while. I knew I didn't want to buy hinges, and I also knew I wanted this entire side piece to act as one big solid hinge with the internal pipe running the full height of the door. I cut my 4 lengths of external pipe first. I went with 115mm long. I then evenly spaced out where I wanted the hinges to be. Then I cut out a piece big enough for the pipe and 2 high tensile washers. The washers are to help take the weight of the door and to support the hinge's rotational movement, instead of it trying to spin on the side of the RHS. I'm also adding a length of flat bar to the back to help keep everything neat and solid. I've temporarily added the internal pipe. This cutout is to get a good weld on it later on. By adding the internal pipe, I can line all the washers up perfectly before tacking them in place. Now I can take the internal pipe back out and weld on the 25mm flat bar backings. I also fully welded on the washers. For the side that is up against the door, I need to grind it back relatively flat so the washers don't get in the way. Here you can see the bow in the RHS that the cutouts caused, but once the external pipe pieces are back in those gaps, this will straighten the RHS back out. I didn't have any cold gal on me at the time, so every day when I packed up, I gave my welds a bit of a spray with whatever leftover paint I had. Here you can see those external pipe inserts looking a little snug, so I clamped either end to a bench with a block underneath to open up the cutouts. Once the pipe wedged back in there, everything was straightened back out. Back to the internal pipe. I rounded over one end, greased everything up and sent it home. And all the hinges are spinning nicely. I had to grind back even more of those washers because they were going to get in the way. I cut some 40mm flat bar for the hinges, lined them up, clamped some spacers in between the door frame and the door, tacked them in place and welded them up. Time for a milk break. I wear a respirator most of the time, but welding gal always makes me feel crook. Moving on to the door. I marked out a size and location I liked. I let the kids do some drawing on the door portion before I cut it out. And then I noticed these Chinese letters and curiosity got the better of me. I don't know what I was expecting to discover, but I started tracing around what I could see, and then I realized the first part is in English, and it says Costco. I looked it up and it's a massive globalized container network, so that's that. We do own a 9-inch grinder, but I don't like how much that kicks, so I just used a 5-inch with a 1mm cutting disc. It didn't take too long and used less than a full disc, but I did go through a lot of batteries. And now the rain has set in. I'm not cutting the bottom off flush just yet. At this point, I want to get an accurate rectangle cut out so I can make the door, and I'll come back to the opening later. I really don't want this piece falling towards me, so I chopped the front edge and put this yard frame behind it to fall onto. Now that the door panel is out and I dry it off a bit, I can clean off the edges with the grinder. Measuring the diagonals. 2082 and 2080. Okay, not too bad, 2mm out. First thing, I am tacking the door panel to the door frame that's a part of that hinge section I made. And I'm setting it back by 2 50-cent pieces, just so I can get a good weld in there. I'm really not loving this weather. Now for the top and bottom of the door. Cut out 3 of the sides, bend it over, weld and clean it up. This wasn't my original plan for the corners, but I cut the door panel too long and, well, moving on. I've got the door clamped on its side for this next piece, 1940 and 1940. And again, cut out 3 of the sides, but this time I'm sitting it on like this. This is how I originally wanted the previous corners. This rain is not easing up and my welding helmet is no longer charging, so I am borrowing my dad's. Now that it's all tacked in place, I can weld it up. Looks like I only did one edge for now. I must have been too keen and moved on. Whoop, don't look at that bit. While the door is down, I'm also cleaning up the rust spots. The wire wheel on the grinder works great for this. Now for the door frame. This I am building right around the door itself. Super simple, basically the same as the door, but putting in some spaces to allow for a nice even gap. For the bottom edge, I am using some 50mm flat bar I had laying around instead of the RHS. Tack and weld the frame in place, and then I welded the rest of the door panel in. That is 5 meters of welding just for the door. Yep, it works. I was really happy to finally test the hinge out. Now moving on to the drip edge. That's probably not the correct name for it. This is made of 40mm flat bar and it has two purposes. 1, to prevent rain from getting in, and 2, to give the door something solid to close up against. I'm setting this in a bit from the edges and welding all of that up as well. That is another 5 meters of welding. This is added down both sides and along the top and covers up the gap between the door and the frame nicely. This does not get added to the bottom edge because water would get in and I would also trip over every time I walked through the door. Now to get the door in. I remeasured everything and can now cut off the excess. No, you don't want to keep that. Get rid of it. Nope, she's keeping it. Cut the same off the other side and yep, keeping that too. I then cut off and cleaned up the bottom edge and gave it a couple of coats of leftover heavy primer. And now time to bring in the door. This thing is heavy and I needed my husband's help to get this in place. I'm cold and tired and not looking forward to another 5 meters of welding, with some of that standing on a ladder. I am just going to tack it in place and weld it up tomorrow. I started tacking at the bottom and brought the door in and out as needed to get it as plumb as possible. Last time I was on a ladder with a welder nearby, I was 13, helping Dad hold up a beam for a veranda. We forgot to reattach the earth, and when he started welding, I got shocked, fell off the ladder into a soft pot plant, and the beam completely missed me. But I still feel uneasy about being up here. There he is now in the background. Hi, Dad. The wind started to pick up, as it always does when someone decides to spray. It's a gas welder, so I was getting quite annoyed at my crappy looking welds and couldn't get the settings right, but I didn't know when I would have time to get back to this, so I kept going. Here is the final length of weld, about 15 meters of welding so far. Drill and tap some threads into each hinge, add a grease nipple and pump it full of grease. I then cleaned up all my welds with the wire wheel, wiped it all down with rust converter and gave it a primer coat. Painted the door green, then masked the edges, painted the edges black, removed the tape, and it's done. I will cover the door handle in next week's video because this video has gone on long enough. And here is the cost of everything in Australian dollars. 25x50 RHS, $96, 40mm flat bar, $27, 25mm flat bar, $6, 15mm ID gal pipe, $22.50, 20mm ID gal pipe, $6, 8 high tensile washers, $6, half a roll of welding wire, $18, half a bottle of Mig Gas, $50. The grease nipples I got from Dad, the paint was left over, so the total cost for this door was $231.50. I don't know if you've priced exterior doors, but I'm very happy with that price, and this is way more solid than anything I could have bought.